She pushed the laundry cart down the third-floor corridor of the Hargrove Grand Hotel in Vancouver at 12:23 on a Thursday morning. 61 years old. Gray-green uniform. Name badge pinned above her left pocket that read Marion, no last name. She stopped in front of room 312. The Do Not Disturb sign had been hanging on the handle since Tuesday. She did not knock. She stood there, the way she had been standing in front of that door every night for the past 2 years. Not because the room needed cleaning, because the man sleeping inside it was her son-in-law. And somewhere in that room, in a leather wallet on the nightstand, was the last photograph ever taken of her daughter. Conrad Hargrove was 44 years old. He was the founder and majority owner of Hargrove Hospitality Group, a hotel chain with 11 properties across British Columbia and Alberta. The flagship was this one, the Hargrove Grand in downtown Vancouver. 22 floors, 308 rooms, a rooftop restaurant that had been reviewed in 4 national publications in the past 18 months. His name was on the building. His decisions ran the building. His signature was the last thing on every major contract the company had produced in 7 years. He was not a cruel man. That needs to be said early, before the rest of it. He donated to the BC Children's Hospital Foundation. He had put 3 employees through professional development programs at his own expense. He once drove 40 minutes in the rain to personally deliver a severance check to a kitchen worker who had been let go through no fault of his own, because Conrad did not think that kind of news should arrive by mail. He could be thoughtful. He could be decent. He was simply not present. Not anymore. Not since the accident. Marion Ashby had taken the job at the Hargrove Grand in October of the previous year. She had applied under her maiden name, which was Ashby, not Vern. Sylvie Vern had been her daughter. Sylvie had been Conrad's wife. Sylvie had been killed 26 months earlier when a transport truck ran a red light on Highway 1 outside of Abbotsford. She was 37 years old. She had been driving home from visiting her mother. Marion had been the one to call Conrad that afternoon. She had held the phone in her hand for 11 minutes before she dialed. She had counted the minutes on the kitchen clock. Since then, Conrad had not visited Marion. Not once. Not because he was angry with her. There was no anger. There was only the particular silence of 2 people who loved the same person and now had no language left between them, because the person who translated for both of them was gone. Marion owned her home in Langley outright. She had $47,000 in a term deposit. She did not need the work, but in September of that year, she drove 45 minutes into Vancouver, walked into the employee entrance of the Hargrove Grand, and filled out an application for a position on the overnight housekeeping crew. She used her maiden name. She listed no emergency contact. When the scheduling manager, a man named Dennis Yee, assigned her to the 3rd floor, Marion had stood at the bulletin board and looked at the room list for a long time. Room 312 was the private suite Conrad kept for himself on nights he worked too late to drive home. He used it 3 or 4 times a week. Dennis asked if there was a problem with the assignment. She said no. No problem at all. On her first night, she stood in the staff change room and put on the uniform. Gray-green, the color of the sea on a cloudy afternoon. She looked at herself in the narrow mirror above the row of hooks and did not recognize the woman looking back. Not because of the uniform. Because the last time she had dressed for night work was 30 years ago, when she was a registered nurse on the overnight ward at Royal Columbian Hospital. She had worn teal scrubs then. She remembered coming home in the gray light of early morning and finding Sylvie, 11 years old at the time, already awake, already at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a library book, waiting for her mother to come home so she could say good morning before school. With Marion picked up her room assignment sheet. She walked to the service elevator. She pressed 3. The hallway lights were motion-triggered. They came on one panel at a time as she moved the cart down the corridor, each section of the hall announcing itself in the dark only because she was there. The floor was carpeted in deep burgundy. Her cartwheels made no sound. She started at the far end, Rooms 301 through 309 were standard doubles, mostly unoccupied on a Tuesday. She moved through them efficiently. Bed corners tucked, towels replaced, surfaces wiped. Her hands knew the work the way hands always know the work they were trained for before this one. Then she reached 312. The suite was empty that first night. Conrad was in Calgary for a property acquisition meeting. But the room held evidence of him. A blazer hung over the back of the desk chair, a half-finished glass of water on the nightstand, the ice long melted. A notepad with handwriting on it. 3 lines of numbers that meant nothing to her and everything to whoever wrote them. She emptied the small trash bin. She restocked the coffee station. She straightened the blazer on the chair so it would not wrinkle. In the breast pocket, her fingers found a folded piece of paper. She did not unfold it. She put it back exactly where she found it. On the nightstand beside the water glass was a photograph in a silver frame. She had not expected it to be there. She stood still when she saw it. Sylvie at 29. Laughing at something off camera. Hair loose. Wearing the yellow cardigan she had owned for 6 years and refused to donate because she said yellow was difficult to find in the right shade. Marion cleaned around the photograph. She did not touch it. She adjusted the angle of the lamp beside it so the light would fall more softly across the frame. Then she turned off the light and closed the door behind her. She had not come to grieve. She had come to be near the person who was the last one left who had known Sylvie the same way she had. Not from the outside, from inside the years. For 2 years, Marion Ashby cleaned the 3rd floor of her son-in-law's hotel. 730 nights, give or take. Each one held something. In February of the first year, she found a crumpled birthday card in the trash bin of room 312. She smoothed it open. The handwriting inside was Conrad's. The card was addressed to Sylvie. The date printed on the outside was from 6 months after Sylvie had died. He had written it anyway. He had written 4 lines in his careful, slightly slanted hand, and then he had folded it and thrown it away because there was nowhere left to send it. Marion read the 4 lines. Then she folded the card and put it back in the trash bin. She finished cleaning the room. She went down to the staff washroom and ran cold water over her wrists for a long time. She did not tell anyone. In May of the first year, Conrad stayed in the suite on a Thursday night after a particularly long board meeting. Marion heard his voice through the door at 1 in the morning while she was restocking the supply cart in the hall. He was on the phone. His voice was flat and exhausted, the voice of a man who had been reasonable for too many hours in a row and was nearly finished. She stood in the corridor with her cart. She did not knock. She listened to her son-in-law sound hollowed out, and she could not do the one thing she had always done for the people she loved in that state, which was make tea and sit across from them until the worst of it passed. In September of the first year, her colleague on the overnight shift, a woman named Bernadette Ossie, 58 years old, originally from Accra, 12 years in Vancouver, 8 years working nights at hotels and office buildings, asked Marion a question during their break. They were sitting in the staff lounge in the basement. Plastic chairs, a vending machine that was half-stocked, a whiteboard with the week's assignments written in 3 different colors of marker. Bernadette was eating crackers with peanut butter from a container she had brought from home. Marion was holding a cup of tea she had stopped drinking. Bernadette said, "Marion, you are the best worker on this floor by a significant distance. Why are you here?" Marion looked at her. "I needed something to do at night." Bernadette put the lid back on the peanut butter container. "You are 60 years old. You move like someone who has done careful work for a long time. Not this work, different work. And you spend more time on 3 and 12 than any other room on this floor." She paused. "I am not accusing you of anything. I am saying that I notice things. I have been working nights long enough to know what it looks like when a person is not here for the paycheck." Marion looked down at the cup of tea. The surface of it had gone still. Bernadette said, "You do not have to tell me anything." She picked up her crackers. She did not ask again. But from that night forward, Bernadette began taking the north end of the 3rd floor whenever Marion was scheduled. She did not announce it. She simply appeared at the elevator with her cart when Marion's shift reached that corridor, and they worked the floor in parallel, close enough to hear each other move, far enough not to need to explain why they were both there. It was the kind of friendship that builds sideways, not from conversation but from proximity, from showing up and continuing to show up and not making the other person justify it. Marion had been doing that for Conrad for over a year, from a distance he did not know existed. Now Bernadette was doing it for Marion. Conrad Hargrove was not a man who showed the worst of things in public. He was good at the surface. His staff liked him. His investors trusted him. In meetings, he was prepared and precise and occasionally, still, capable of something close to warmth. What he had lost after the accident was the ability to be in a room without filling it with work. Because if you filled a room with work, you did not have to notice what else was in it, which was the particular kind of quiet that follows a person who's once there and is not anymore. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of a room that remembers being occupied. He had sold the house in Coquitlam. He could not stay in it. He told his business partner it was a practical decision. The commute. Too far from the city. His business partner did not argue, because you do not argue with a man who has just lost his wife about where he chooses to sleep. He lived now between the penthouse of a building he owned in Yaletown and the suite at the Hargrove Grand when the drive home was too long or the building too quiet. He ate most meals at his desk or in the hotel restaurant. He did not cook. Sylvie had cooked. He had done the dishes, always without being asked, because that was the arrangement they had arrived at without ever discussing it, the way good arrangements are arrived at. Now there were no dishes to do. He had called Marion twice in the first year after the accident. Both times she had answered immediately, on the first ring, and he had heard in her voice the same thing he felt in his own chest, which was the absence of the person who had always been between them, translating, connecting, making both of them make sense. The calls lasted less than 5 minutes each time. Both of them said everything was fine. Neither of them knew how to say anything else. He had not called in 14 months. He told himself he would, when things slowed down, when he had the right words, when he was not carrying the company through a difficult quarter and a personnel problem on the Alberta properties and a zoning dispute in Kelowna that had been ongoing for 9 months. There were always reasons. The reasons were real. That was the particular cruelty of it. The distance was not chosen. It was arrived at, one unmade phone call at a time, until the phone call itself had become a thing too large to pick up. Marion's hip had been bothering her since March. An old injury, a fall she had taken in the hospital in the 1990s that had never fully resolved. The overnight work was harder than she had anticipated. 11 hours on her feet on hard floors was not the same at 61 as it had been at 32. Commercial housekeeping workers in Canada report some of the highest rates of musculoskeletal injury of any service sector workforce. The average age of an overnight hotel housekeeper in BC is 43. Marion was not here because she needed the job. She was here because she needed the building. But her body did not make that distinction. She had not missed a single shift. In January of the second year, Conrad arrived at the hotel later than usual. After 2 in the morning, Marion had already finished the 3rd floor and was restocking the supply closet at the end of the hall when she heard the elevator. She pressed herself against the shelving in the dark. She listened to his footsteps on the carpeted floor. She had memorized the sound of his walk in the 2 years she had worked in his building, the way you memorize any sound you hear night after night without ever being meant to. He walked past the supply closet. She could hear him stop at the door of 312, the electronic lock clicking, the door opening, the door closing, the closest they had been in 2 years, one wall between them. Marion stood in the dark supply closet for a long time. Then she finished counting the spare towels, turned off the closet light, and took the service elevator down. On a Tuesday evening in March, Marion slipped. She was cleaning the bathroom of 312. The floor tiles were wet from the previous cleaning, and her shoes, the same pair she had worn since she started, the soles beginning to smooth from 700 nights of corridor walking, gave way on the wet surface near the base of the tub. She went down with her left knee hitting the tile first, then her palm, then the side of her forearm catching the edge of the tub surround. She lay on the bathroom floor. The exhaust fan was still running. The light above the vanity was very bright. She pushed herself up. Her knee was not right. She made it to sitting, then to one hand on the edge of the tub. She stood. She tested the knee. It held, but not well. 20 minutes later, Bernadette came looking for her. Marion had not appeared at the elevator at the end of the floor the way she always did. Bernadette found her in the bathroom of 312, finishing the mirror above the sink, her left hand braced on the vanity. Bernadette said, "Marion." Marion said, "I slipped. I'm fine." Bernadette looked at the way Marion was holding the vanity. She said, "You are not fine. Sit down." Marion said, "I have 2 more rooms." Bernadette said, "I will do the 2 rooms. Sit down." Marion sat on the edge of the tub. Bernadette finished the mirror. Then she knelt and looked at Marion's knee. It was not broken, but it was swelling. Bernadette called the night supervisor, a man named Terence Falk. Terence came up from the lobby. He looked at Marion's knee and said they should call the on-call medical contact and file an incident report. Marion said that was not necessary. Terence said it was required. He brought the form up from his office. He sat across from Marion in the small living area of the suite, which was not protocol, using the guest furniture, but the staff lounge was 4 floors down, and Marion's knee was not ready for the stairs. He worked through the form. When he reached the line for emergency contact, Marion looked at the page for a long moment. Bernadette was standing near the window. She said quietly, "Marion, someone needs to know." Marion said, "I don't have anyone close." Bernadette said, "That isn't true. You told me about your son-in-law." A silence settled into the room, the kind that is not empty. Terence's pen stopped moving. Marion looked at Bernadette, then she looked at the floor. She said, "He owns this hotel." The room went still. Terence set the pen down. Bernadette's hand, which had been resting on the curtain panel, dropped to her side. Neither of them spoke. The sentence sat in the air of a room in a hotel the man it described owned, spoken by a woman in a gray-green uniform who had been cleaning this floor for 2 years without his knowledge. Marion did not say anything else. She did not explain. She looked at the window and the city lights beyond it, and the reflection of herself in the dark glass, 61 years old, a bruised knee, a name badge that did not carry her real name. Bernadette crossed the room. She sat down beside Marion on the edge of the tub. She did not ask another question. She stayed. 2 days passed. Bernadette worked her shifts. She told Terence not to pursue the incident report for now. Terence, who had been in hospitality management for 18 years and had learned which situations benefited from restraint and which ones didn't, agreed. He filed a general note about a minor slip and fall on the 3rd floor, name of worker pending confirmation. He did not follow up, but Bernadette watched Marion walk. The limp was there. Marion tried to hide it, redistributing her weight, slowing her pace on the turns. Bernadette had walked alongside Marion on that floor for over a year. The rhythm was wrong. On the 2nd night after the fall, Bernadette made her decision. She did not have Conrad's phone number. She was a housekeeper in his hotel. He was the man whose name was on the building. There was no version of the world in which she had his contact information. But she had been in his suite 300 times. She knew the room. She knew where he put things. On the 3rd floor, in the desk drawer of room 312, Conrad kept a business card holder. Bernadette had moved it a dozen times while cleaning the desk surface. It was black leather, embossed with his initials. She was not going to go through his belongings. But she could leave something. At 5:40 in the morning, 15 minutes before the crew clocked out, Bernadette took Marion's name badge from the hook in the staff change room, where Marion had left it when she went to put on her coat. She looked at the photograph. Marion was smiling in it, a small and complicated smile, the kind that a person produces when they are told to look at the camera while their mind is elsewhere entirely. Bernadette carried the badge to the third floor. She walked to 312. She knocked. No answer. Conrad had not stayed in that night. She held the badge in her hand. She thought for a moment. Then she walked to the housekeeping cart that was kept in the third-floor corridor as a permanent fixture. She took a note card from the guest stationery packet. She did not write a name. She did not write an explanation. She wrote one sentence. She tucked the note card into the badge clip so that it folded over the front of the card. Then she placed the badge, face up, on the pillow of Conrad's made bed, the photograph facing the ceiling. Marion's name on the badge. The note card folded over it. She smoothed the duvet around it, left the room exactly as it was, closed the door. She clocked out at 6. She walked to the bus stop on Burrard. She sat down on the bench and looked at the early sky, the particular gray-blue of Vancouver at dawn in late winter, and she thought about whether she had done the right thing. She had. She was sure of it. She had done it the quietest way she knew how. Not a phone call, not a confrontation, just a photograph on a pillow, just a truth in a room where the right person would find it. Conrad arrived at the hotel at 8:30 that morning. He had an 8 o'clock call with the Kelowna property manager that had run over, and he had taken it in his car in the parkade, which was why he arrived later than usual. His assistant met him in the lobby with a briefing note and a coffee. He took both and walked toward the elevator. He said he needed to drop his bag in 312 before the 9 o'clock. He used his key. He pushed the door open. He set his bag on the desk. He turned toward the bed to drop his jacket. He stopped. There was something on the pillow, a small rectangular card. He stepped closer. A name badge, gray-green lanyard, the Hargrove Grand logo in the upper corner, and below the logo, a photograph. He picked it up. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He looked at it the way a person looks at a thing they recognize before they can explain why. The face in the photograph was a woman in her early 60s. She was smiling a specific kind of smile, not a pose smile, a smile that arrived on its way to somewhere else. A smile he had seen before on a different face, a younger face, a face he had memorized over 11 years of mornings and arguments and silences and quiet evenings, and one telephone call he still could not fully think about without his mind finding a reason to stop. He read the name, Marion. No last name. He read the position, overnight housekeeping. Floor 3. He read the start date, October. 2 years ago. He stood at the foot of the bed in his own hotel suite holding a name badge that belonged to his dead wife's mother, who had apparently been cleaning this floor for 2 years. He noticed the notacard folded into the badge clip. He opened it. One sentence. The handwriting was not Marion's. He did not recognize it. It read, "She comes every night because she does not know how else to stay close to you." Conrad sat down on the edge of the bed. He sat there without moving for some time. The city outside the window continued. Traffic on Burrard. A seagull on the ledge of the building across the street. The sounds of a hotel waking up, the elevator chime. The housekeeping carts beginning to move on the floors above him. The particular low hum of a building that has been running all night and will keep running. He held the badge against his chest. The photograph pressed flat against his jacket. His wife's mother had been working the overnight shift in his hotel for 2 years. She had cleaned his room. She had straightened his things. She had been in this suite in the hours after he left it, and before he returned to it. She had emptied the bin that held the birthday card he had written and thrown away because there was no address left to send it to. She had read those 4 lines. He understood that now. She had held the card and she had read those 4 lines and she had put it back, and she had never said a word. He thought about all the nights he had slept in this room without knowing she had been here before him. He thought about the angle of the lamp beside Sylvie's photograph, which had always seemed slightly different from how he had left it, and which he had always adjusted back, never once wondering who had moved it. He thought about the way the room had always felt, in some way he had never been able to name, a little less empty than the apartment in Yaletown. He understood that now, too. He did not call his assistant. He did not go to the 9 o'clock. He called his driver and said he needed to go to Langley. It took 50 minutes. Traffic on the Trans-Canada. Spring construction near the Brunette interchange. He sat in the back seat looking out the window at the Fraser River, at the flat gray of the water, at the mountains above the valley still carrying snow in the upper elevations. He had not been on this highway going east in over a year. The last time had been for the funeral. He had sat in the back seat then too. He had Sylvie's mother's address in his phone. He had always had it. He had never used it to navigate here himself. The street in Langley was lined with birch trees. The house was a Cape Cod style, white with green trim, a bird feeder in the front garden, topped up. A light on over the front door even though it was 10 in the morning. He had the sense that the light was always on. That someone had made a habit of it. He sat in the car for a while. His driver asked if he should wait. Conrad said yes. He walked up the front path. The garden beds on either side had been turned for spring. New growth. Someone was paying attention to the garden. Someone who had time to pay attention. He knocked. Footsteps inside. The slow, uneven pace of someone favoring one leg over the other. The door opened. Marion Ashby stood in the doorway. She was wearing a cardigan the color of oatmeal and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was smaller than he remembered, or possibly he had spent so long in rooms filled with large things that he had forgotten the actual dimensions of the people who mattered. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. In her eyes, he could see what he always saw in her eyes, which was the particular quality of someone who knew Sylvie from the beginning. Not from the beginning of the marriage, from before, from childhood. From the absolute original version of the person he had loved for 11 years. Marion was the only person left on earth who carried that version. He had not thought about it in those terms until now. Standing on the front step of her house in Langley, realizing that he had been 45 minutes away from her for 2 years and had not come once. She said, "You should come in. I was about to put the kettle on." Not, "Why were you never there?" Not, "Do you know what I did to stay close to you?" Not, "I cleaned your room for 700 nights because I could not think of another way to hold on." Just, the kettle. He stepped inside. The hallway was narrow and warm. There were photographs on both walls. Some he recognized. Some he had never seen. Sylvie at every age, arranged in no particular order. The way photographs arrange themselves over years in the house where a person was loved from the very beginning. In the kitchen, Marion was already at the stove. She had a blue teapot that looked like it had been in this kitchen longer than the cabinets. He sat down at the table. The chairs were wooden, worn smooth in the way of furniture that has had the same people in it for decades. He put the badge on the table. He put it face up between them, the way a thing should be put down when it is time to stop carrying it. Marion turned from the stove. She looked at the badge. She looked at it for a long moment. She said, "How did you find out?" He said, "Someone left it on my pillow." She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. She turned back to the stove. She poured the water. She brought 2 mugs to the table. She sat across from him. She put her hands around her mug. He said, "Marion," she looked at him. He said, 2 years. She said, "I know." He said, "Your knee." She glanced down, then back up. "It's healing. You should have told me." She was quiet for a moment. "Conrad, if I had told you, you would have felt obligated. And I didn't want to be an obligation." She paused. "Sylvie's gone. You don't owe me anything." He looked at her. He said, "You're not an obligation." She looked back at him with the steady, patient expression of a woman who has learned not to require more from a moment than it is actually giving her. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't call." She said, "I know." He said, "I didn't know how." She said, "I know that too." The kettle had stopped. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed on the road. A bird landed briefly on the feeder in the garden and was gone. He said, "Was it bad, the work?" She considered this. She said, "My hip and my knee would have preferred retirement. The rest of me needed something to hold on to." She looked down at the mug. When you lose someone like that, you look for the places they existed. You look for the people they loved. I couldn't call you because every time I tried, I could hear you not knowing what to say, and I couldn't bear being a reminder of something terrible for the person I most needed to talk to about her. He sat with that. He let it be true. He let it sit on the table beside the badge and the tea, and everything that had not been said in 26 months. He said, "I kept her photograph in the room." She said, "I know. I used to adjust the lamp so it fell on the frame properly." He had no response to that. There was no response. Only the weight of it. The particular weight of care that has been received without the receiver knowing the hands it came from. They sat in the kitchen for a long time. The tea went warm, then cool. Marion put bread in the toaster without asking. She brought it to the table with butter and a jar of honey. Conrad ate 2 slices. He could not remember the last time he had eaten toast at a kitchen table that belonged to someone else. He asked her about the garden. She told him she had been gardening more since everything, that it helped. That there was something stabilizing about putting things in the ground and waiting for them to come back. He told her about the Kelowna dispute. Not because it was relevant, but because it was the thing his mind had been holding all morning, and he needed somewhere to put it. She listened. She asked 1 or 2 specific questions. Practical, clear. She had been married to a contractor for 31 years. She understood negotiations. At some point he realized that an hour had passed. He said, "I'd like to come back." She looked at him carefully. He said, "Not as an obligation. Because you're the only person I know who remembers her the way I do. Or close to it." Marion looked out the window at the garden. A long look, the kind a person gives when they have been waiting a long time for a particular sentence and need a moment to make room for it. She said, "Sunday dinners. Sylvie always came for Sunday dinners. You can come for Sunday dinners." He nodded. She said, "I cook at 5. You come whenever you get here. There will be food." He said, "I'll be here at 5. She said, "We'll see." Not unkindly, with the practical knowledge of a woman who has spent 2 years adjusting a lamp in an empty room. 3 weeks later, Conrad established a partnership with the BC Hotel Association to provide extended health benefits to overnight and part-time housekeeping staff across 42 member hotels in the province. The initiative covered physiotherapy, prescription costs, and mental health coverage. It was not a large announcement. There was a brief notice in a trade publication. Conrad did not seek coverage for it. He did not name the initiative after anyone. He upgraded the footwear allowance for all overnight housekeeping staff at every Hargrove property. New shoes every 18 months, ordered at the start of each employee's contract. Non-slip sole, proper support. The kind of thing that costs less than $100 per person and matters, concretely, to the people whose feet carry the weight of the night. Bernadette Ossie was promoted to overnight housekeeping supervisor at the Hargrove Grand. The position came with a pay increase, a revised schedule with consistent hours, and access to the new health benefits from their first day. She accepted. She never told Conrad that she had written the notacard. She did not believe she needed to. Some things are complete in the doing. They do not need to be retrieved afterward and named. Marion gave her notice at the end of the month. Terence thanked her for her work. She handed in her uniform and her key card and the name badge with the photograph of herself, smiling at something that had nothing to do with the camera. She drove home to Langley in the early morning. She put the kettle on. She sat at the kitchen table. On Sunday at 5 o'clock, Conrad's car turned onto her street. She heard it from the kitchen. She had made a roast. She had made the potatoes the way Sylvie had always asked for them, which was the way Marion had made them since the 1980s, which was the only way she knew how to make them, which was, it turned out, exactly the right way. He knocked on the door. She opened it. He was holding a jar of honey. He said he had remembered she had used the last of hers on the toast. She looked at him. She took the jar. She said, "Come in." He came in. They ate dinner at the kitchen table as the late afternoon light moved across the floor, and the garden outside went golden and then gray and then dark, and neither of them said Sylvie's name, and both of them thought of nothing else, and that was fine. That was the right way to do it, to carry someone in the room without requiring them to be spoken in order to be present. Some distances are not measured in kilometers. They are measured in the small, daily decisions not to reach for the phone, not to knock on the door, not to turn around and look at who is already there. Marion scrubbed the floors of her son-in-law's hotel because she did not know how else to be close to the piece of her daughter that was still living. Conrad built a building with his name on it and did not know that the woman who loved his wife first was on her knees in his suite every night while he slept 12 floors above her. In the end, the distance between them was never about the highway between Vancouver and Langley. It was about the words that go unsaid long enough that they become walls, and about the quiet, persistent people who find a way to stay on the other side of those walls anyway. Tending the room, adjusting the lamp, waiting for the light to come back on.